We're starting off with this key study that was conducted by Shoshani and Steinmetz. And if I show you the syllabus, this is the last bullet from the last section, from the last unit from health psychology. So, application of positive psychology. In a previous lesson a while back, we spoke about positive psychology. I tried explaining you what positive psychology is, and our focus was on three different types of happinesses explained by Martin Seligman, and they were pleasant life, good life, and meaningful life. Let's talk about how this idea of positive psychology can be applied or has been applied already by these two, uh, uh, these two uh, uh, scholars, I'd like to say, that is Anat Shoshani and Sarit Steinmetz. They both from Israel, and this study that is a part of our syllabus. This was conducted in 2014. Not only is this a part of our syllabus, but this is the key study from the unit Health Psychology. And if we have a look at the title of the study, this has to do with using positive psychology in schools to improve mental health amongst adolescents. Now, the exact title of the study is Positive Psychology at School, a school based intervention to promote adolescents' mental health and well being. So, this is about positive psychology. This is a school based intervention. Understand the title first. This is a school based intervention that tries to promote adolescents' mental health and their well being. This was published in the Journal of Happiness Studies, and this particular research, it evaluates positive psychology's intervention that is aimed at enhancing health amongst middle school students in Israel. Of course, the sample comprises mostly of Jewish students. This particular study that we talk about, this would demonstrate that such interventions as in positive psychology interventions could significantly decrease distress, anxiety, depressive symptoms, while of students of adolescents, students who are adolescents, and this would at the same time strengthen or improve their self-esteem, their self-efficacy, and optimism. So, taking this ahead, let's start off with the context of for this particular study. Costello et al. In 2004 report that there has been a dramatic rise in reported mental health disorders in children and adolescents since the late 1990s. According to the World Health Organization, it found that rates of mental health disorders in those under the age of 18 range between 8% to 20%, and that's a big number. Furthermore, Hubner et al. In 2000 found that 25% of American students reported an unhappy or terrible existence or high levels of negative school or family experiences. During this time, positive psychology has progressed in terms of understanding these trends and beginning to make interventions to build towards positive outcomes. So, I don't think this is difficult or this is difficult. This has statistics from the WHO that show us how there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of reported mental health disorders amongst children, increase to the point that it is scary. The second reference study we have over here by Hubner et al. This shows us how American students today report being unhappy and terrible about their existence, which is again sad. And this is where positive psychology would step in. There has also been a change in the culture of education in this same time period. The focus is much more on academic achievement, with assessments and curriculum goals a priority, with less of a focus on the social and emotional components of education, according to David Hargreaves in the year 2003. Now, before we proceed, let's understand what the term subjective well-being over here means. Subjective well-being, this consists of a cognitive component, that is life satisfaction, and an affective component, that is the presence of positive feelings and absence of negative emotional experiences. So we're talking about a combination of cognitive we're talking about we are talking about a combination of cognitive components and affective components, where cognitive component has to do with life satisfaction and affective component has to do with the presence of positive feeling and absence of negative emotional experiences. If we take this further and talk about the main theories and explanations here, recent research has begun to consider a dual factor model when considering the relationship between well-being and ill-being. So all of us, we do know there are times in a life where we feeling good, and then there are times in life when we're not feeling really good, right? So recent research has begun to consider a dual factor model. So a dual factor model which consists of, while considering the relationship between well-being of individuals and ill-being. For example, Greenspoon and Safloska, yeah. Greenspoon and Safloska in 2001 defined mental health as two distinct but related dimensions of mental illness and positive mental health. So when we speak about well-being over here, we're talking about positive emotions. I'm talking about this part. So when we use the word well-beings, we're talking about positive emotions, we're talking about life satisfaction, we're talking about self-esteem, we're talking about resilience. And when we speak about, or when we use the word ill-being, we are referring to psychological distress. This might include anxiety, this might include depression, this might include negative emotions, this might include stress, or this might indicate mental health struggles as well. Now, taking this ahead, for example, Greenspoon and Sakloska defined mental health as two distinct but related dimensions of mental illness and positive mental health. The suggestion is that mental illness and positive mental health are not opposite ends of the same scale. It is possible it is possible experience high levels of distress alongside high levels of subjective well-being. So it's possible that an individual experiences high level of distress alongside high levels of subjective well-being. Subjective well-being is defined as consisting of cognitive components that has to do with life satisfaction and an affective component that is the presence of positive feelings and absence of negative emotional experiences. Subjective well-being is particularly relevant in studies in schools as subjective well-being is associated with good academic achievement, social competence, physical health, and engagement at school, as well as better relationships with parents, teachers, and peers. There are two main approaches to explaining well-being over here: the hedonic approach and the eudaimonic approach. Now learn these names before we proceed. Now, I hope you're done learning these names. There are two main approaches to explain that we use to explain well-being. Number one, the hedonic approach and the eudaimonic approach. The hedonic approach, now focus on these arrows here. The hedonic approach for well-being focuses on maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. So it involves ideas such as positive emotions, life satisfaction, and happiness. Whereas the eudaimonic approach focuses on the well-being, the approach for well-being focuses more on realizing your potential with an emphasis on meaning, autonomy, and purpose in life. So hedonic well-being is about feeling good. This is about feeling good and maybe seeking pleasure, while eudaimonic approach is about living well and fulfilling one's potential. Understand the difference here. Hedonic Hedonic well-being or the hedonic approach, this is about feeling good. This is about seeking pleasure. Just write it here. So, taking this ahead, there are two main approaches to explaining well-being. There are two main approaches that we're using to explain the well-being of individuals. The first one is hedonic approach, and the second one is eudaimonic approach. So, hedonic approach has to do with you feeling good, you seeking pleasure, but this is temporary and you're actually relying or you're dependent on external factors where you're trying to seek pleasure, when you're trying to seek comfort. Whereas, on the other hand, when we speak about eudaimonic approach, you are more focused towards living well. You are more interested in fulfilling your own potential. You seek happiness, but you seek deeper happiness, which you want to be more lasting, long lasting. And you want to find the purpose of your life. You want to work towards your growth. You want to give meaning to your life. So, the hedonic approach for well being focuses on maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. So, it involves ideas such as positive emotions, life satisfaction, and happiness. Here, the eudaimonic approach for well-being focuses more on realizing your potential with an emphasis on meaning, autonomy, and purpose in life. If we have a look at the aim of the study, the aim of the research was to see whether participation in an intervention program would increase participants' self-efficacy. So, whether participation in an intervention program would increase participants' self-efficacy, optimism, life satisfaction, and self-esteem, and decrease levels of psychological distress and mental health problems. So, would participation in an intervention program, would participation in an intervention program at a school level focusing on adolescents in Israel, would participation in this intervention program increase the participants' self-efficacy, optimism, life satisfaction, self-esteem, and decrease the levels of psychological distress and mental health problems? The research also aimed to discover if there were demographic differences in the effectiveness of the intervention program. Now, demographic differences may be the difference between children who are living in a single parent family or children who are living with both parents. This could have, I mean, this is one of the demographic factor. Another could be in terms of socioeconomic differences that makes that to many people matters a lot. So the research also aimed to discover if there were demographic differences in the effectiveness of the intervention program. For example, the gender of the child, the level of family income, or single versus two-parent households. If we talk about the sample design over here, the sample demography, the sample was 1,167 students, age ranged between 11 to 14 years, and at two large middle schools in the center of Israel. Now, focus on this. I've seen many students getting confused with this part. The focus the sample was 1,167 students aged 11 to 14 years at two large middle schools in the center of Israel. A total of 35 middle schools in the area were selected for the initial pool, and the principals of 8 of these schools showed an interest in the positive psychology intervention program. Out of these 8 schools, one was randomly allocated to the intervention program, and another matched for demographics acted as a control group and would participate in the intervention program after the completion of the study. So there are many students who end up writing, oh, there were 8 schools. There were 8 schools whose principals showed interest. But out of those 8 schools, which were picked up from an initial pool of 35 middle schools. Now, out of those 8 schools, there were two that were randomly allocated, right? So there was this one that was randomly allocated for the intervention program, and then there was this another picked that matched the demography of or the demographics of the initial school that was picked, and this we refer to as the control group. The control group would participate in the intervention program, but after this study completed. So almost all the participants were Jewish with differing levels of religious observation. There was a mix of socioeconomic status that was found, and 64% lived in a two-parent family, and 36% of them lived in a single-parent family. The brief symptom inventory, BSI, was used to measure the adolescent's mental health. So there were many scales that were used, but the one we primarily focus on is the BSI, that is brief symptom inventory. This brief symptom inventory, I have a question here. Yeah, can I explain the selection of schools again? Yeah, I can explain it to you. Now, see, initially, there were 35 schools that were picked up, 35 middle schools that were picked up from a particular area. Okay. Now, out of those 35 middle schools that were picked up, that were chosen for the initial pool, there were 8 such schools whose principals showed an interest in this intervention program, right? So 35 initially. Out of those 35, there are 8 schools, 8 middle schools whose principals were they showed interest in this intervention program. Out of those 8, there was this one school that was randomly chosen, okay, and one school that was randomly chosen to for this intervention program. Now, to be able to compare the results, there was another school out of that 8, right? So one has already been chosen. So now we left with 7. So the 7 that we left with now, out of those 7 schools, there was this one school that was matched with the initial experimental group, right? The initial experimental group is the group that was chosen and that was randomly allocated to the intervention program. And the control group, of course, had to be matched in terms of demographics because you want to see that it is just this intervention program that is making a difference, right? So you're welcome. Now, taking this ahead, almost all of the participants were Jewish with different levels of religious observance. There was a mix of socioeconomic status, and 64% lived in a two-parent family and 36% lived in a single-parent family. The brief symptom inventory, that is BSI, which was one of the questionnaires that was used. There were others as well, but for now, we just talk about the BSI. The BSI was used to measure the adolescent's mental health. The BSI was designed for use with adolescents and reports norms for that age range. So what does this do? This reports norms for that particular age range. The BSI contained 53 self-report items rated on a 4-point Likert type scale, measuring 10 subscales, including depression, anxiety, paranoid ideation, hostility, and interpersonal sensitivity. There were other scales that were used alongside the BSI as well. The Rosenberg self-esteem scale, that is RSC, the general self-efficacy scale, satisfaction with life scale, and life orientation test revised LOTR scale to measure optimism. Now, I'm not saying you should learn all of these, but I just try to explain these to you so that, I mean, the names in itself, they look pretty complicated. So just having a basic know-how on them is good. When it's on your discretion, you want to learn them, learn them. I think it's okay, totally okay, even if you do not learn them. So about the brief symptoms inventory, this is something that we had seen that the book had description for as well. So this had 53 items that were self-report measured. 4-point Likert scale was used. There were 10 subscales that included depression, anxiety, and hostility. This was used to identify clinically relevant psychological symptoms. Number two, the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. I'll just rush through this so that if there's any question, yeah, sure, do ask. Rosenberg self-esteem scale. This was a 10-item measure that uses a 4-point Likert scale. High scores indicate high self-esteem. See, the name in itself explains it. Number three, general self-efficacy. This one is self-esteem. This one is self-efficacy. Now, about this general self-efficacy scale, this was a 10-item measure that uses a 4-point Likert scale. High scores indicate higher self-efficacy. This was used to assess how people cope with daily hassles and life events. So self-efficacy, I'm sure you do have an idea, just in case if someone doesn't. Self-efficacy is it's a belief in one's ability to successfully complete a task, or to overcome challenges, or to maybe able to achieve certain goals. Taking this ahead, so we spoke about the brief symptoms inventory, BSI. We spoke about the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. We spoke about the general self-efficacy scale. And now we talk about the satisfaction with life scale. 5 items measured the users measures. There were 5 items that were measured that use a 7-point Likert time scale. There was a mean score across the 5 items that was calculated. This was used to assess an overall satisfaction with life. See, the names explain it pretty much all. This has to do with self-satisfaction. The third one has to do with self-efficacy. This has to do with self-esteem. And this is a brief symptom inventory that has to do with this, and this. Now, taking this ahead, life orientation test, the revised version, which was also referred to as LOTR. There were 10 items that were measured here. There were 3 positively phrased statements. There were 3 negatively phrased statements. There were 4 filler statements. This again uses a 5-point Likert scale, and this assesses how optimistic or pessimistic a person is. Now, I hope you all have a basic understanding on these scales or these measures that were used. Going back to where we were, this is where we were. Yeah. So other scales were used alongside the BSI, that is the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, the general self-efficacy scale, satisfaction with life scale, and the life orientation test revised version to measure for optimism. The intervention program involved 2 aspects. So what was happening was, since we're talking about a school, right? So the teachers in the school were trained first, and then it was expected of the teachers that they would administer the program to the intervention program, administer it to the students, right? So you're teaching teachers to teach this program or to help students with this program, right? So the intervention program involved 2 aspects that ran alongside each other over the course of a school year. Okay? Understand this. Teachers attended 15 two-hour-long training workshops that were run by clinical psychologists to train them in group dynamics and positive psychology. Alongside this, the second aspect now, the teachers administered an age-appropriate similar program. Remember, teachers were adults, of course, and over here we're talking about 11 to 14-year-old children. And the program had to be, of course, tailored according to their age. So, alongside this, the teachers administered an age appropriate similar program to their students using a textbook and materials provided by the researchers. The classroom program included activities, discussions, video clips to watch, and talk about, and poems and stories to read. So, the classroom program included number one, activities, number two, discussions, number three, video clips to watch, number four, to talk about, and poems and stories to read, all dealing with key aspects of positive psychology. Of course, if you're dealing with younger kids, you need to keep it interactive. You need to tailor it or design it or customize it according to their age bracket so that they don't lose interest. For example, to address gratitude, students were asked to list five or more things they were grateful for that week and share their reflections with the group. The control group continued with the usual studies and did not take part in any positive psychology activities. Questionnaires were given out to all students before the program began in September 2010. This we refer to as the baseline data. At the end of the academic year, when the program ended, in June 2011, as well as follow ups in December 2011 and June 2012. Remember, this study was published in 2014. Yeah. Now, I hope everyone has understood it so far. Let's take it a little further and quickly hop on to the findings, results, and conclusions. At the start of the study, there were significant differences in the mental health of students according to particular variables. Now, what variables were there? Remember, there were three major variables. Number one, it was in terms of income. Number two, it was in terms of kids either living with a single parent or both the parents. And the third one was gender. So, students from a lower income or from a single parent household were more likely to report signs of poor mental health, such as anxiety and depression, and were likely to have lower self esteem, optimism, and life satisfaction. So, the variable income and the variable living with a single parent did affect children's mental health. They were found to be more anxious, more depressed, having lower self esteem, them being less optimistic about life, and them reporting less of satisfaction with life. Boys were more likely to show anxiety, lower self efficacy, optimism, and life satisfaction than girls, but girls were more likely to show other signs of poor mental health and lower self esteem. So, gender over here matters too. Involvement in the intervention was associated with fewer mental health symptoms over time compared to those in the control group who showed an increase in mental health symptoms. Students in the intervention program showed significant decrease from the beginning to the end of the study in general distress, and this graph explains it to us. This tells us about the amount of time spent. And then there were follow-up periods. This tells us about the general amount of distress. So the intervention group, you see how there's a decrease. And for the control group, you see how there's actually an increase. So yeah, taking it ahead, students in the intervention program showed significant decrease from the beginning to the end of the study in general distress, depression symptoms, anxiety symptoms, and interpersonal sensitivity. Those in the intervention program reported significant increase in their self-esteem, self-efficacy, optimism, while those in the control group reported a decrease in self-esteem and self-efficacy and only a slight increase in optimism over time. Unexpectedly, there was no significant difference between the intervention group and the control group in changes over time for life satisfaction. So this factor did not matter much, which wasn't really something that was expected. High-risk students came from low-income or single-parent households. They showed less of an improvement in mental health symptoms as a result of the intervention program than low-risk students. However, they did still show an improvement. So the intervention did not make much of a difference for the kids from low-income backgrounds or the kids from single-parent households as compared to the kids who were from a high-income background and who lived with both the parents. Nonetheless, there was a difference. I mean, there was a difference, but the difference wasn't uh, much for the kids from the lower income, or the improvement wasn't much for the kids from the low income or single parent households. If we conclude this study clearly shows a successful application of positive psychology. The results show quite clearly that the intervention program was associated with an improvement in mental health symptoms for those involved compared to those in the control group. Some students responded less well to the intervention program than others, and of course, we're talking about individual differences over here, but an improvement was reported for these students nonetheless. The intervention program had a positive impact on the culture of the entire school, placing an emphasis on the quality of the relationships between staff and students, which should have a positive effect on the whole school community in the longer run. Now, this study comes to an end here. If we talk about evaluating this particular research, the sample was limited. Why is it that we're saying the sample was limited? Because it was just one school. It was carried out on only one school. So the caution must be used when generalizing the results to the wider population. However, it should be considered a strength because there was another school that was used as a control group. And of course, there was a match pair design, we'd say, because the students, they were matched between the intervention program uh, intervention program school, the school that had the intervention program going on, and the control group both, which of course would increase the validity of the study as it enabled the results of the intervention program to be compared directly to similar participants who were not undergoing the intervention program. A further increase in the validity came from the longitudinal nature of the study, which allowed the researchers to see the effect of the intervention program and the changes in the control group over time. So remember, this explains it all. See, this is the amount of time. The intervention program was carried out in a school environment and was administered to students by staff, so this automatically increases the ecological validity. The results can be generalized beyond the research setting, and the intervention program can be administered to future year groups of students as well. One weakness of the study was on the reliance on self-report measures. You saw how uh, there were 5 different types of questionnaires that were used, and they were all examples of self-report measure, of course, because they were questionnaires. This could lead to a decrease in validity due to students being subject to social desirability and therefore not giving accurate reports, or due to demand characteristics, where students may be inclined to give more positive reports following the intervention that because they realize that is what the researchers expected. Again, a question that could be asked at this point is, how else could the researchers have collected the data? I mean, how how else do you think this would have worked? Now, taking this ahead, if we speak in terms of the application of psychology to everyday life, of course, mental health interventions, they do help. They should promote well-being. So application to everyday life is relevant to the study, of course, by Shoshani and Steinmetz, because they have trialed an application of positive psychology through an intervention in a school and seen the positive effects on the mental health of the students over a 2-year period. These results can be applied to everyday life because other schools can learn from this and could carry out the intervention program. Remember, the overall culture of the school had changed, and it had changed for better. Or something similar in their own school, and hopefully see similar improvements in their children. Not only was the intervention program effective for the students directly involved, but it also improved the culture of the entire school and all staff involved. This will have positive effects for the children and staff at the school for years to come. And other schools may also learn from this and take a similar approach. Adolescent mental health has become increasingly concerning over the last couple of decades. The final statement. So any intervention that can help combat this issue is a really important contribution. So yeah, what do we learn from this implications or the application of psychology to everyday life? Mental health interventions, they should promote well-being, and positive psychology is an example of such intervention. And I mean, treating distress or anxiety or depression is one thing, but at the same time, promoting well-being through positive psychology is a really good thing if schools adapt to this. Someone may experience happiness while still struggling with mental illness, which means that only focusing on reducing distress is insufficient for uh, complete mental health of an individual. Again, schools and workplaces, they can pick up from this. They can foster environments that build resilience, that build strength, rather than just addressing psychological problems. So the final line over here is there can be a lot done by psychology, through psychology, not only to help the ones who've already been through a lot, but for the ones who haven't as experienced bad as yet, psychology could still have a very positive role and positive contribution towards it. Now, this officially brings this key study to an end, and this brings this unit to an end as well. I hope this was helpful.